of light, symbol of knowledge, symbol of warmth, symbol of freedom. We light this chalice as a symbol of our faith. Here we gather to celebrate hope and the infinite possibilities of love.
Well, good morning. Welcome, everyone. Happy Sunday, July 12th, 2020. Great that all of you can join us this morning via this unique Zoom communication format. Today is our third event in our 2020 Summer Forum Speaker Series. Our third speaker is Michelle Quist, columnist for the Salt Lake Tribune. Michelle earned both her bachelor's degree and her law degree from BYU. Graduating with honors, she worked in New York City and Salt Lake as a lawyer. Married, and she is the mother of 7 children. As a Tribune columnist, Michelle has addressed gender bias, politics and government, religion, and other related subjects. Here are titles of some of her columns. If I title this Girl Power, will you read it? Where are the women in Utah state government? Does being a woman in the legislature matter? There is sexual harassment at the Utah legislature. I hate initiatives, but I signed the medical marijuana petition. This is why the Utah GOP is a train wreck. A depressing trip on Trump's road to nowhere. The Salt Lake Tribune is neither anti-Mormon nor anti-Republican. Government cannot hold religious views in contempt. The Mormon Church can be better at handling domestic violence. Utah's worship of stay-at-home mothering needlessly widens the gender wage gap. Pandemic pulls the economy into a she-session. Time to apologize for the church's racist history. Listening to each other will make us more civil. This morning, the title of Michelle's remarks is How I Do It All, to be a columnist for the Salt Lake Tribune, an activist, and a single-parent mom for 7 children. When she concludes, we will then take 1 minute for the offering. We may be meeting virtually, remotely, via Zoom, but we are spiritually meeting within the First Unitarian Church of Salt Lake City. After the offering, Michelle will be happy to engage in a lively Q&A session until 11 o'clock. You all know that there is no such thing as a bad question. So please type your questions into the Q&A window, and I'll review those and select among them. So that, with that in mind, Michelle, welcome this morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Those are some headlines.
You're the author.
We don't write our own headlines. But I do. I'll take responsibility.
Okay. Attribution.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that kind and generous introduction and for having me today. I am thrilled to join the conversation. Like you mentioned with the Q&A to follow, I do hope that it's more of a conversation than anything I have to say. I think that's really the main goal of my writing, is to start conversations and to have back and forth people and between people that typically don't engage in conversation or civil dialogue. And so that's really what I'm trying to do. The title of today, How Do I Do It? I just need to say, I don't know how I do it, or really the answer is probably not very well. day to day. I may do one or two things well on a day, but everything else, has to take its place. I don't recognize my circumstances as anything different than the family and work obligations that everybody else also has. Sure, I'm alone as a parent. I separated and divorced 4 years ago. My children's father recently passed away, but I'm not alone. I mean, heck, my house has 8 people in it. I wish I was alone. Perhaps I'll just share a little background as to how I got into journalism. And for that, perhaps a review of the offices I've inhabited. After law school, I started with a window over the World Trade Center, down on Wall Street in New York City. Of course, that also put me at ground zero on 9/11. I have experiences from that day when I was there on the ground that will be with me forever and that changed me. I have experiences after that of, as a lawyer, I volunteered for a death certificate project put on by the Red Cross for family members, that couldn't, they didn't have bodies and they only had questions, and that experience really triggered something in my legal career that stayed with me. I counted, though, back to the window, the office, I counted that window as a success, right? I had made it. My next office job was no office job, an 8-year hiatus of diapers and dishes and longing, really. Then, thanks to a loving and wise, merciful judge in Salt Lake, Judge Monroe G. McKay, who recently passed away. His offices are in Salt Lake, but he sat on the U.S. 10th Circuit, which has a court in Colorado, in Denver. My office there was a desk in his chamber library, overlooking a window on State Street, but I still had a window this time, right? I still had a window, just not an office of my own. Then back home again with twins. Those kids really get you. Then my own office again, but no windows, in the bowels of a law school where nobody recognized me as the dean of admissions, but kept asking who else they could talk to, right? Where's the boss? You're a woman, you don't look old enough, I need to talk to, you can't be it. Unfortunately for them, I was it, but that kind of gets old after a while. And then again, home as my office, comfortable for sure, but this time filled with the needs of a special needs child. And then a few months later, an unexpected email popped into my inbox with an invitation from Jennifer Napier Pierce at the Salt Lake Tribune, a role model to me for sure. They wanted me to write. Somebody wanted to hear what I had to say. My political involvement, I had been an officer in a Salt Lake County political party, and I had been the secretary officer in the state political party. So that involvement, and yes, I firmly believe my Twitter account had provided me an opportunity I never imagined, and it fit perfectly. So my next office was a desk in a newsroom next to a few old guys, where my department was disconnected from everybody else's. But I got to sit next to George Pyle and Pat, and it was a great fit. Just me and the old guys, we wrote every day. Well, George and I did. I published 400 to 700 words every day on deadline for a year. New ideas and viewpoints and quick writing. It's a really good tutorial to help you engage in the process and to consider other ideas that you usually don't. I've run for office, state attorney general in in an appointment election within the party. I lost, obviously. I had a residency problem 2 weeks from the 5-year residency requirement. I ran for Salt Lake County Council, which I also lost. But listen, especially if you're a woman that's watching right now and you want to run for office and you lose once, just keep trying, keep running. The men do it, so we can keep running, we can keep trying. I have a desire to serve. I have a desire to use my voice for good. And I have a desire to use my voice for those who don't feel like they can. And I think right now that is my that's my greatest ability, to be able to do that. I prefer questions over answers always. And that's me.
Okay, great. Then what we're going to do right now is we're going to take a moment to metaphorically pass the plate, the offering, and we'll come back in 1 minute, and then we'll go to questions. So again, I invite you to, if you have questions, to please type them into the Q&A window, and I'll select among them, and we'll go until 11 o'clock today. Okay, so. Okay, well, we're back. And Michelle, you've worked as an attorney. You lived in New York City during a traumatic time. You worked for a federal judge, 10th Circuit. Your legal training and your political experience running for office, together, how do those skills and experiences come together to make you a columnist for a statewide daily, the Salt Lake Tribune?
Yeah, just to be clear, they certainly do not make me a reporter. And sometimes people are very confused at that. They're confused when I express an opinion, because they think, you know, I'm supposed to be neutral because I work in journalism. Columnists obviously have opinions. That's what we're supposed to have. My legal training, and I still do work as a lawyer. Journalism doesn't pay very much, and I have to pay the mortgage. So it helps me. It gives me a background of reason and research, right? So I start with knowing that I need to put the time in to do the research, and then I also come from it with a understanding that there's always two sides. There's always a you know, an opposing viewpoint that is credible to somebody. And I think that my legal training has helped me understand that, one, time and work are necessary to the product. You know, you have to put the research in and the time to edit, even editing. And then and two, that the opposing side should be dealt with. You know, that you should always be considering both sides when I'm putting out an advocacy piece like that.
Okay. Your writing style is candid, it's intimate, conversational. How do you keep your private life private?
You know, I think people connect better when the writer is willing to share more about their life. I should probably keep more of my private life private than I do, but there are aspects of my life that I'm able to keep private by just, you know, not making them, not putting them at issue, and respecting the fact that my private life involves other people. And while it's my right to talk about, you know, myself and the things that I think and feel, it's not my right to put words into other people's mouth or to share, you know, intimate, private things about other people. And so I try to make sure that that I recognize that line, whenever I'm writing. It's hard actually with my children, because it's easy to look at them as just extensions of me, as opposed to people that have their own, not only ideas, but their own right to not have their mom talk about them in the newspaper. And so, the little ones don't know. I told a story once about he was probably 5 at the time, and he rode his bike out into the street and didn't look both ways. And a lady came up and got mad at me over it. And I'm sure my, 5-year-old didn't care that I talked about him riding his bike in the street. But as they get older and issues get more important, where it's, a race related, issue at a high school, or, something like that, my older kids are going to be more sensitive to that, and to me telling their stories. And so I try to be aware of their ability to tell their own stories, and that's not my place.
Okay. Well, then to follow up on that, do your kids ever give you ideas for your columns? Because you're writing almost 500 words a day.
Right.
Give you ideas, and what would be examples?
Well, just to clarify first, I'm not writing that much anymore, because I don't write the editorials anymore with George. I did that for about a year, and then in the reduction in force, I went just down to a columnist. So I am only writing once every few weeks. But they give me ideas, but more than that, they put me in situations where it's unique or special, or something is happening because I'm there. Whether it's a parent fight at a soccer game, or whether it's a conversation at a preschool drop-off line, or they obviously my life revolves around getting the 7 kids back and forth to their schools. And last year I had 4 schools and 1 driver, and all of their activities and the things that they want to be doing with friends. And so they give me, the high school girls give me ideas coming home from conversations they have with their friends, relating to race and gender, and just little things like girls leaving class to use a restroom in high school is different than boys leaving class to use a restaurant in high school. And teachers offering extra credit for kids who don't take bathroom passes affects girls differently than it affects boys, because sometimes a girl can't wait. A girl's having a monthly issue that they need to go and take care of. And so a benign neutral policy isn't benign and neutral when you think about it in a gender perspective. And I never would have known about that had I not had girls in high school.
Okay.
So things like that.
Yeah. I have a question in the Q&A window from Nancy. How have the changes in ownership of the Tribune affected your job? You've alluded to this. Has it changed any of the things you choose to write about? And I want to add to that, Pat Bagley has spoken to my classes on a number of occasions, and I remember that Pat said the one matter that he was told years ago that he could not draw cartoons about was the issue of ownership of the Tribune while that was being that was in transition. So that question, how has ownership now changed your role?
I haven't noticed a change directly. I've never been told what to write or what not to write. I did have my own personal questions or misgivings about endorsing candidates. From a legal perspective, if they're a 501c3, they can't endorse anymore like we used to write, the endorsements during political season. And they don't do that anymore. As an independent columnist, I wasn't quite sure if I could or couldn't. So this governor race, recent governor race, primary, I didn't take a position publicly. I think I was more comfortable just kind of waiting out the transition to see where independent columnists fell as opposed to the paper itself. So probably the one area would be this question about whether, you know, how personally I can endorse, if I can write about it, or if I can't even do it at all. Those questions are still outstanding, really.
Politics. I have a question here. It's with regard to the Utah State Legislature, and it's from Dr. Alan Coombs. How easy or difficult is it to communicate with the leaders in the Utah State Legislature?
It's more difficult as the columns get more critical. So they are less likely to respond quickly the more columns I write about how they're doing it wrong, you know, and that's just like human nature, right? But otherwise, they are, because we have the kind of legislature that we do, where it's, you know, a part-time and they have their own jobs, they're very approachable. They're usually very accessible. I've used, you know, I also have a position on the Bar Commission, and, you know, we have committees that are trying to, you know, help the legal services get out to those who can't afford them. And I've asked legislators to serve on those committees, and they're always very willing and happy to help in that regard. I would say they're accessible. I would say they get tired of reading critical columns. And so at that point, I just need to be more, you know, consistent with reaching out to them and not taking silence as the first answer as the answer.
Okay. How do you critique systemic racism, homophobia, sexism, Islamophobia, and other such behaviors?
I think the most important thing right now that we're seeing, and that I've been trying to do over the past few years, is to first talk about it, to give examples where people's you know, biases prevent them from seeing a situation that is actually a systemic problem, whether it be racism or gender or homophobia. I think people, you know, people are busy, and we've got busy lives. There's kids and jobs and soccer games, and, you know, all of the mundane day-to-day things that keep up our lives. And I don't put a negative blame on them for not, you know, for not seeing it until it's pointed out. And that's what I think we're trying to do. That's what I'm trying to do. The more we talk about it, the more we point out examples and specific instances, I think people will start to see that, oh, there is a problem here. It's not a one-on-one problem. It's a problem that starts where the system is not serving everybody equally. And I can see how it affected that in this situation. Perhaps there are others. And so I think the critique is that we start naming it and labeling it and talking about it as much as we can.
Earlier, you referenced the perception of gender bias when you were working for Judge McKay. Question here from Ross in the Q&A window. There are fewer women in public and business leadership roles in Utah compared to other states. How do you think we can change this? Is it a cultural issue? Is there anything the state can do policy-wise?
I think it is a cultural issue here in Utah, but it doesn't stop there. You know, when I was at the law firm in New York City, I started my job single. I got married while I was working, and then I was pregnant with my first child. This is New York City. It's not a, it's not a Utah culture-based system. And my work was immediately taken from me when they found out I was pregnant. I was put into the inside bowels of the law firm to do a doc review. I was a third year. I had never done doc review before. Temps came in to do doc review, yet all of a sudden I'm there 8 hours a day, every day. The clients that I had been having personal, communication with, they were assigned to different lawyers. And at first I didn't get it, right? And I just thought, oh, I guess they need help here. And 3 months later, I'm about, 8 months pregnant, 7 months pregnant. My friend walks into the office and I look at her and I said, this is because I'm pregnant, huh? And she looked at me and she's like, yeah. Like, it was so obvious to everybody, but, this naive little, I mean, I didn't, I went to school in Utah. I grew up in California, but I for sure was sheltered. I didn't expect it. You don't expect it. And so I didn't know how to fight back, right? I didn't know how to tell them that it wasn't okay. I had that experience in New York, and yet here in Salt Lake, when I was pregnant in the judge's chambers, he was more than happy. He was happy I was pregnant. He was happy to let me work from home. He, had a crib in his office for clerk kids. He just was more than accommodating. And so, yes, we have a culture issue here, but there are also people that recognize that it's not necessary. So things that we can do, we can value women in the workplace. We can recognize that majority of Utah women work, and they're going to work. Some need to work, some want to work. And when they get pregnant, that's not a reason to write them off. So the policy changes could start with state government providing, paid maternity, paid helpful, flexible work arrangements when they're coming back. Maybe a year or two off if the woman wants, and then to have their position come back to. If the state won't do it with state agencies, then we're certainly not going to be able to induce businesses to do it. And the research shows that businesses are saving money when they're accommodating women out on maternity leaves and the women come back, as opposed to having to retrain and constantly replace women who are having babies. I think that would be a policy start. I think a cultural start would be to recognize that women work, and that when we have babies while we're working, it's not because we don't want to work. It's just because we need to have babies, right? Because we're the only ones that can do it. So
Could a possible answer also be to have more women in lawmaking positions in the Utah State Legislature, House and Senate, where women are very much underrepresented? And I mentioned this with a question I see in the Q&A window from Mark. Michelle, did you see the PBS American Experience program this past week, The Vote, about the 70-year battle for women to obtain the vote? Do you have any thoughts on this? And he also adds, how do you handle 7 kids and work?
I haven't seen The Vote yet. I'm so excited that it was released. This week was kind of a no TV week for me. I had a bunch of stuff going on. But our numbers in the women legislators, our numbers there are abysmal. And there's no explanation for it. There's no justification for it. Just saying that women don't want to run is not the story. It's not the truth. Women do want to run. We want to be involved. There are women running every cycle. They don't make it past primaries. They don't make it out of convention. They don't have the money behind them. They don't have the support. When the governor has multiple times appointed commissions full of men, maybe one token women. The governor has recruited men for positions, for political offices, not women. You know, I was, a personal story, I was secretary of the Utah GOP, and the next, you know, term was coming. The chair didn't want to run again. I put myself out there. I said, I would love to run for chair. I had one of the senators behind me. He said, yes, that would be so awesome. Let's do this. And the governor didn't want to support me. He went out to he went out and kept asking this other guy who had run for something before but wasn't an officer if he wanted to come and run. There's no excuse for that. You know, if there's a woman that wants to run, men need to support them. Male legislators need to recruit women as much as they're recruiting men to run for these offices that go vacant or to be put on commissions, on boards. It has to come from that perspective, or else the women just we're not going to make it.
15 years have passed since Olene Walker was lieutenant governor and sought the position of a governor in her own right and was denied the opportunity to come out of the Republican State Convention and defend her record. Two men ran, and eventually for the last 15 years, we've had male governors and lieutenant governors. This year, chances are we're going to see a woman be lieutenant governor of the state of Utah, Republican or Democratic. So would that fact be encouraging to be able to make a mind shift, a shift here, and thinking in terms of lessening the gender bias that's been apparent in this state?
Oh, I think it will be great. The fact that there are no women in Utah executive offices right now is embarrassing. I think it will make a difference, if not, and it's not a symbolic difference. If Deidre Henderson and Spencer Cox do eventually win in November, Deidre's actual governing in that office will make a difference as far as gender placement and typical gender bias, just by systemic, right? Like she is who she is, and her experience shows that that she understands that that we have an issue. You know, I didn't answer the question from the last one about how I do it, right? How I take care of 7 kids and work at the same time. And she probably gets the same question too. And I mean, it's hard to answer that question because I just do it day by day, right? I have older kids that help with younger kids. I have a work situation that is more flexible than a 40-hour, than a salaried position. I work full time, but I do it with multiple different jobs so that I can be available and accessible once 3 o'clock comes around for the kids and all the driving. That puts me at a disadvantage in the work world, you know, and in law firm life. Me leaving the office at 2 o'clock to do the 2:30 high school pickup leaves me at a disadvantage to everybody else who's still in the office and can obtain assignments, especially since I'm an hourly worker, and if I'm not there, I won't get work and I won't get paid. But women that have to and women that want to figure out a way to do it. And obviously the ideal situation is to have a partner that is 100% in it with me. I don't have that, but that's the ideal, is to have somebody there that recognizes that, you know, when 2 people are working, then both need to take part in everything else that's happening at home.
Okay. Might mention that Karina Brown, the candidate for lieutenant governor with the Democratic Party, is the mother of children as well. That matter of balance. I see in the Q&A window a question from Sherry Whitmer. That says, how do we get women to support women. This is also part of the problem.
I think as more women start getting involved, then others will see that it's not as scary or threatening to any kind of status quo that they're worried might be adjusted, right? My decision to work doesn't affect your decision to stay home. My decision to work and stay home doesn't affect your decision to work and get a nanny. You know, so I think as more women start to create these different methods of mothering and working together, that other women will see that and recognize that it's okay, and that it doesn't threaten their way of, you know, that their own choices, and that perhaps it's having a residual positive effect on the policies of our cities and our states, and that shoot, they're doing a really good job, maybe I should support them. You know, it's the same idea. The more we see it, the more we talk about, the more other women will see that, oh yeah, that was I really agree with what she just did. You know, I don't like what he did in that city, so maybe I should vote for her, or, you know, whatever it is.
Could part of the problem be not just gender bias, but the delicate male ego? And I mentioned that in May of 2004, I was walking around the Republican State Convention, and Olene Walker was seeking the nomination of the delegates, and I heard older white men with delegate badges saying out loud, "I just can't vote for that girl." This is 61-year-old PhD grandmother Olene Walker, the governor of the state. And I remember very clearly hearing those words. So I've related those words each semester to my students in order to enhance their awareness of the bias that we have among people who are opinion leaders. They're delegates.
Yes. I mean, I've been told multiple times when I was running for office, I need to be at home with my kids, you know, and you just smile and turn away. Obviously the response is, well, I can't just be home. I have to work. So are you going to support me, or are you going to not support me? You know, because the choice isn't, am I not going to work or am I going to work? Because I have to work and I want to work. So are you going to support me because I have better ideas, or are you going to, you know, be biased about it because, you know, I don't have the right body parts? The male ego explains some of it, but it doesn't explain why some women are so reticent to support other women. And, you know, it's a complex problem that many researchers have looked at. And of course I have no answers, but again, I think the more women who start to get involved and who start to win, I think that will help this idea that other women are uncomfortable with it. And I think that would help that we just need to start building numbers. We need to start building numbers.
We're in Salt Lake City, and for the last 6 weeks, we have had a protest dealing with systemic racism. And I have a question here from Robert Lindsley in the Q&A window. Can you help us understand the Salt Lake District Attorney's decision not to prosecute the 2 officers who shot a young man in the back many times? Were his conclusions, that's Sim Gill's, conclusions legally justified in your opinion? And would you be writing about this?
I probably won't write about it because I have a legal, there might be a legal conflict issue. The problem is that his opinion probably is legally justified until the courts come in and recognize that their definition of you know, reasonable behavior by police officers is too broad. I ghost wrote the appeal in the Dylan Taylor appeal. And so I know the issues, they're close to me, but the case law is what it is. And for Sim Gill to come, for him to conclude anything different would be for him to conclude against current court opinions. So the process is, you know, he followed the process. The process is, he says it's legally justified, and then, you know, and then the family sues to try to overturn these cases that say that this was legally justified. You know, how can a man running away be shot, who's shot in the back, how can that be legally justified? You know, that's the question. And it's such a broad definition of, well, you know, of police safety and reasonable actions on behalf of a policeman. But it's the courts where that definition is laid out. It's not in the prosecutor's office. So unfortunately, I don't think he could have done anything different, but I do think that the cases need to be, I do think the courts need to change those definitional cases.
Okay. You would not write about this particular story, but in your career as a columnist, is there a story that you wish you had not written, and why?
You know, I can't think of specifics other than maybe 2 to 3 times where I've written something and somebody calls me afterward and says, hey, you know, you didn't reach out before you wrote this. So like I said, I wasn't trained as a journalist. I'm trained as a lawyer. I didn't go through journalism school. I've never been trained on this, you know, on the idea of calling sources and vetting and having those uncomfortable conversations. And of course, the reporting side is different again than an opinion columnist. And I'm not necessarily required to, you know, reach out and tell someone that I'm going to say something mean and what would he say about it. But that might be the better way to be writing, right? Like maybe perhaps the column mentioning Rocky Anderson was something like that. I had no conversation with him beforehand. I didn't agree with what he did, but I didn't talk to him. And it ended up, you know, really causing consternation for a few weeks. And I still could have written about the issue. I could have either talked about it without using a name, or I could have talked with him before and said, what do you say about this? And then included some of his, you know, like I said at the beginning, some of his viewpoint in there as well. And I didn't do that. So I'm learning those types of things and wishing that I did a bit better. Okay. Nobody likes a call afterwards.
Right. Have you ever been told to go easy on a story? For example, on the LDS Church or on the Utah State Legislature?
Not by anyone at the newspaper. I've been called by church officials after one story that said perhaps I should have gotten, you know, I should have talked to them first. But I mean, they really don't. Nobody can tell me what to write on, right? I'm not employed by them. The church has never, I've never received consternation from a bishop or a stake president or anything like that. You know, I wrote about the tithing issue with the $100 billion fund. I didn't get any calls after that. I wrote about the reserving the whole chapel for the Christmas program when one of the apostles spoke. I was a little worried about after that one. And in fact, who was it? Oh, somebody, my friend called me after and said, you know, this is the office of the president. He'd like to see you on Tuesday at 4. You know, he was playing a joke. But for a minute there, I was like, oh no, what have I done? But no, I haven't received anything like that.
Okay. A question from former legislator Pete Brunfossen. He says, my perception is that Olene Walker in 2004 was purged from the Republican Party leadership because the party had turned politically to her right, and that she was shunned for that reason. Has the Republican Party turned significantly to the right? Is it the party, for example, of the current occupant in the White House?
Oh, I think so. I think that's part of it. I don't think all of the state central committees are aligned with President Trump, but a loud vocal majority of them are. I wouldn't say majority. A majority on the state central committee, the governing body of about 180, they probably are. But of all of the delegates, I don't think a majority would be aligned with President Trump. But the problem is not everybody shows up. So the people who show up set the policy of the party. With Aline Walker, I think there might have been a shift. John Huntsman had been governor, but there was also a practical issue that she waited to decide a few more weeks than, like, if she had been in a few more weeks earlier, I think she could have had a little more momentum. But yeah, there was gender bias with Aline Walker that within the state delegate system back then that was really hard to overcome.
Okay. You mentioned John Huntsman, Jr.
Mm-hmm.
Friends of mine from outside of Utah have asked me, how could he have lost? Elected governor twice, ambassador to China and Russia, candidate for president. What were Utah voters in the Republican Party thinking? But inside Utah, within the Republican Party, that decision was made. So I guess the question is, why did John Huntsman lose? Why did Spencer Cox win the June 30th Republican primary?
I think Utah Republicans like loyalists. I think they, the message that John Huntsman Jr. left the post and worked for President Obama and then worked for President Trump and ran for office, kind of put him in the position of being an outsider and not a Utahn. Yes, of course, his family is, quintessential Utah royalty, right? But Spencer Cox had been here being the lieutenant governor for years and years. And Spencer Cox's track record for issues that were, more liberal and conservative was good. He's able to get real with voters. He's able to sit down and listen. He, getting proximate is really important to him. And I think Utah voters were more comfortable with somebody who's been here than with somebody who they perceived as having not necessarily ulterior motives, but ambitions outside of Utah. Utahns like Utahns. The worst thing someone could do is spell Utahn with an A after the H. And I'm not saying that John Huntsman did that. I'm just saying, Utahn Republicans in their elections and in their primaries, they want to make sure that the Utahn is here for Utah, I think.
Perception, in other words, John Huntsman was not so much perceived as the past, but rather that he was no longer one of us. He was not on the inside in the state. And even though he said the best job in the world is to be governor of Utah, the fact is, judging him by his actions, he had walked away from the job.
Why'd you leave? Right. And of course, all of this, international aplomb and the national connections that he has and just who he is, Utahns aren't afraid to shoot themselves in the foot if they think that someone else might be just a little more Utah.
Yeah.
So
on June 30th, Spencer Cox won with 36% of the vote, which means 64% of those who voted against him. Could it be, in this year that is so unprecedented, with a pandemic, with a recession, depression, with nationwide and worldwide and even Salt Lake City protests on systemic racism, that voters who are upset, maybe polls indicate the most upset in 50 years, unhappy with the way things are, that they might just decide to vote out the incumbents and vote in somebody who has not held office. In other words, if Spencer Cox is the incumbent endorsed by the governor and been in state and is perceived to not manage the virus state effort well, could upset voters decide to give themselves permission in this year to vote for a Democrat?
Always. You always, that can always happen. And anybody who thinks that it can't is too arrogant for their position. It's always an option, and nobody should ever take for granted that voters want to hear them be real and listen and be responsible for their own actions and their own mistakes. And if they perceive Spencer Cox as not being responsible for what has happened, and not being responsive to voters' concerns, then yeah, this is a year that anything can happen.
In this unusual year, and I'm seeing a question pertinent to this in the Q&A window from Bill Jansman, how many Democrats registered Republican to vote against Cox in the primaries? Now, chances are we can't document that, but we know that a significant number of high-profile independents, unaffiliated, and Democrats did vote in the Republican primary. Chances are that was probably to vote against former Speaker Greg Hughes. Maybe it was
Right.
to support former Governor John Huntsman, but the fact is, it happened.
Yeah, I think a lot of it was to support Huntsman. I know many unaffiliated voters also, affiliated so that they could vote for Spencer Cox. I don't know the numbers. I know that I remember seeing reports that there were less Democrats changing affiliation as there were unaffiliated parties affiliating. And, I know there was an uptick in registration for all parties. Democrats had an uptick in registration as well as Republicans. But I think the numbers were showing that the corresponding downward numbers was mostly coming from the unaffiliated column as opposed to the Dem column. Other than those very vocal, like Jim Debakis and others who, Kem Gardner, who were encouraging, people to change their affiliation.
And
I think the fact that Spencer Cox won by less than 40% is a problem, and I think that's a issue that came from our new, our new election laws. I recognize I like the signature method of getting on the ballot, but we do need to fix the plurality problem, because a candidate that's winning with 30% doesn't have as much of a you can always dismiss their support because of that. And I think the legislature should work on the plurality issue.
maybe to follow up, there's kind of a groundswell of support in different counties and among individuals in Salt Lake County for ranked choice voting is a new way.
Mm-hmm.
6 years ago, the signature process was innovative, still is law.
Yep.
How about ranked choice voting as a potential topic for a column?
That's a great topic for a column, if not a little in the weeds. I included a couple paragraphs about it in the column right before the primary started. It does get pretty technical. I have not seen a lot of negative reasons to not start using it. I think it might be good for Utah, and I know there are 2 legislators that are running a bill for it.
Okay. Michelle, the last question is kind of a softball question. I've been asking you some hardballs.
I'll take it.
Okay, in your journalism career, what story or stories have been the one or ones that you're most proud of to have written, and why?
I'm most proud of writing the ERA columns. I did 2. I did one that was the Republican, the Republican reason for ERA or something like that. And then the second one was in response to the Deseret News opinion piece about why the ERA still, you know, that we should still vote against it. Basically, all the reasons from 40 years ago. I was worried about writing it because I was worried about, you know, my participation and membership in my church and backlash that might come from it. I didn't get much, and I got a lot of support. I realized from writing it that there are more women than people realize that want this, and it helps solidify that for me.
Michelle, you mentioned ERA, and I must mention this because I was present when the legislature in 1973 and 1975 voted down the ERA. And the arguments as an intern at the legislature was that to approve the Equal Rights Amendment would destroy the family as we know it, that we would have same-sex bathrooms and women would be in combat and men, their status would be weakened. These were arguments of, you mentioned 40 years ago, over 40 years ago.
Yeah.
So you indicate that the ERA today still voted down?
Yeah. Oh, would I?
Mm-hmm.
No,
Oh.
we need, no, the whole 40 years has proved that those arguments were wrong. The ERA has nothing to do with it. Some of it happened anyway, despite the ERA never passing, and some of it is just total junk. And so, no, I think we need the ERA. I think Utah missed an opportunity to come outright with that. I think the initial position of the Republican Party in favor of the ERA was correct. And I hope that we get our act together.
Okay, great. Well, we're coming up on 11 o'clock. We start on time, we end on time. Michelle, I want to thank you very much for being our speaker today, our third speaker in our Summer Forum speaker series. I want to thank you very much. And
thank you for having me.
Thank you. And then just as we close, a quick reminder about next week, July 19th, that Vicki Bennett will be our fourth Summer Forum speaker. Vicki is the director for Salt Lake City's Department of Sustainability. The title of Vicki's presentation will be Salt Lake City Government, Sustainability Policies, the Impacts when Residents are Staying Home. Please join us next Sunday, July 19th. In the meantime, keep thinking critically. Keep asking the hard questions. Please stay healthy and safe. Please be well.